Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we start, I've got two things. Number one is a thank you, and number two is information on a really cool event that's coming up. As for the thank you, I want to thank my friends at Ranchlands for generously supporting this episode. If you listen to the podcast for a while, then I'm sure you're already familiar with Ranchlands, and you probably remember my episode with Ranchlands founder and CEO Duke Phillips III. In that conversation, Duke tells a lot of really great stories about growing up on a remote ranch in rural Mexico, where he was really, really far away from any of the conveniences of modern life. It was like being back in time. So on that ranch, he and his family had to be fully independent and self-sufficient, which meant they had to make almost all of their own leather equipment by hand. That means saddlery, tack, belts, and much more. And now, many decades later, Duke and his team at Ranchlands at the Chico Basin Ranch, which is about 30 minutes from where I live, they're still making these high-quality leather goods, and not just for themselves, but for people like me and you. So you can go to ranchlandsmercantile.com or ranchlands.com to find a full selection of handmade leather goods, including bags, knife sheaths, belts, and much more. And they also offer hats, clothing, knives, and various other high-quality goods. Ranchlands Mercantile has an ongoing partnership with the outdoor apparel company Filson, that I'm sure you're all aware of, and they were also recently featured in Vogue magazine. And on a personal note, my wife's birthday was back in April, and I bought her one of their palm leaf hats, which you can get at ranchlandsmercantile.com, and my girls gave her a handmade leather band that goes around the hat, and she really loves both of them. It was a great present, so thank you, Ranchlands, for selling such cool stuff that I can buy for my wife. So if you want to learn more, go to ranchlands.com or ranchlandsmercantile.com to check out the full selection. I've got links to all that stuff in the episode notes. And the second thing, the event. This is going to be really cool. If any of you folks live in or around New York City, I'm going to be at Patagonia Brooklyn. So that's the Patagonia store in Brooklyn, New York, on Wednesday, May 18th at 6:30 p.m., and I'm going to be interviewing the author and past podcast guest, Dylan Tamina. And Dylan is the author of the amazing new book, Headwaters, which I've recommended many, many, many times already. We're also going to be joined by Frances Ashforth, who did all of the artwork in Dylan's new book. And she is a very interesting person as well. And so we're going to have a great conversation. If you want to come to the event, we'd love to have you there. It's free. You do need to RSVP. There's a link in the episode notes where you can get all the information. You can click through RSVP. And if you don't see the link in there, just go to mountainprairie.com/events and all the information is there as well. Really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing some of y'all there. Thank you. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Land Tawney. Land is the CEO of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, one of North America's leading and most effective advocates for wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. Founded around a campfire in 2004, BHA uses education, nonpartisan political advocacy, stewardship initiatives, and stakeholder coalitions to ensure the protection of our public lands for generations to come. As the name implies, BHA is an organization that works on behalf of sportsmen, but you don't have to be a hardcore hunter or fisherman to benefit from its work. I'm a lot of things, but a hardcore hunter is not one of them, yet I'm a proud member of BHA and a super fan of all that it has accomplished. Land was born and raised in Montana, the son of two highly respected conservationists who instilled in him a deep reverence for wild places and the importance of protecting them. From an early age, Land was hunting, fishing, and spending time around his parents' friends and colleagues, many of whom were well-known, renowned conservationists. When Land was in college, his father passed away, which only fortified his desire to devote all of his professional energy to conserving the wild places that had always meant so much to his family. After successful stints at several notable conservation organizations, Land took the helm of BHA in 2013. Since then, he's led and grown the organization into one of the country's leading voices for sportsmen and public land protectors. When Land and I connected for this conversation last week, he was hard at work preparing for the upcoming BHA Rendezvous, which is taking place May 12th through 14th in Missoula, Montana. We discuss all the details of that premier conservation event, and you can find additional information in the notes and on this episode's webpage. And we also covered a ton of interesting and important topics, including the importance of advocating for conservation with our representatives in Washington, D.C., how apathy can be a huge threat to our wildlands, the slippery slope threat of transferring federal lands to state or private entities, the importance of remaining optimistic in the face of challenges, how BHA helps and encourages new hunters, the importance of BHA's state chapters and local leadership, Land's personal and professional conservation journey, and of course, he offers up tons of great book recommendations. A huge thanks to Land for joining me for this conversation during such a busy time of year. I encourage all of you to check out BHA's membership options and to consider supporting them if you're so inclined. I deal with conservation organizations all day in both my podcast work and conservation work, and BHA is the best of the best. Hope you enjoy this episode. Can you just talk a little bit about Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, the history of the organization, and kind of what you guys do?
Sure, Ed, and thank you so much for having me on. I very much appreciate it. It's a way to spread the message. So Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, we were started around a campfire in 2004 in Oregon, and those folks that were around that original campfire looked at all the other organizations that are out there and doing great work, whether that's Trout Unlimited, the Elk Foundation, Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, kind of the list goes on. But nobody was really focused on public lands and public waters specifically. So that was the impetus of the organization, and the idea was to make sure that all of us have access to public lands and waters, and then the fish and wildlife habitat when we get there. I think that we can have all the access we want, but we need that quality fish and wildlife habitat when we get there. So that was really the impetus of the organization, and it's grown immensely since that campfire. I would say we have a raging bonfire now. And so, we have 30,000 members across the country. We have chapters in 48 states. The two that we don't have right now are Hawaii and Delaware. So anybody listening from Hawaii and Delaware, please contact us.
Nice.
And then we have 3 Canadian provinces. So British Columbia, Alberta, and then up in the Yukon territories. And so in addition to, the membership with these chapters, we have about 725 volunteer leaders that also come in the form of our Armed Forces Initiative, where we have active leaders on military installations across the country. I think we're in 18 now. And then that also goes to our kind of college club volunteers that we have all across the country. And we're in 26 campuses with our college club. So we have all these people that are absolutely amazing, and I would say the people are the currency of BHA. What do we do with them? What do we do to make sure you have access to public lands and waters and the quality fish and wildlife habitat when you get there? I would talk about that in a couple different ways. The first one is just on the ground, and that on the ground kind of stewardship work is something that we continue to kind of lean into. Yeah. And whether that's taking down fences in wildlife corridors, whether that's, taking out junipers that are encroaching on sagebrush, whether that's doing riparian zone restoration, trail restoration, putting in access sites. That is all kind of this get your hands dirty, dirt underneath the fingernails kind of work, which is awesome. Yeah. The other thing that we do, like kind of on the ground, I would say, is related much more to policy, and that's working with folks at a state fish and game commission level, at a district ranger level within the Forest Service, or, with our local folks at the Bureau of Land Management or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's really working on projects with them, both these kind of getting your hands dirty projects, but also policies that they're putting forward. So that's through travel management plans, resource management plans. And then we move up to kind of like the state and provincial level. And that state and provincial level, actually working with, the state legislatures, provincial legislatures, and governments, whether that's, the administrations or elected officials, to, again, perpetuate policies within those states that help us gain access to public lands and waters, and then the quality fish and wildlife habitat when we get there. That moves up to Washington, D.C., where we are working on grand, big ideas. And I would say, I can give you examples of, many things that are happening at a state level, many things that are happening at a federal level. But really what we try to do is that people don't think their voice counts anymore in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And we really try to turn that on its head, and make that easy for them to engage. And I think that, a signature issue that we are super proud of, that our folks got engaged in was 2 years ago when the Great American Outdoors Act, which had, the Land and Water Conservation Fund within it, which was $900 million a year for access and conservation in this country, as well as a $10 billion price tag for the backlog of maintenance to address, half of the backlog of maintenance we have on our public lands. And so as this bill is moving through Congress, we were educating our members. And then when it came to actual passage, the last month alone, our membership made 6,000 phone calls up to Congress.
Wow.
And that to me, Ed, that's like this true grassroots power. So we're working at a local level, but then how do you flex that into, something that's happening at a national or federal level? That's exactly how we did that. And, we've done that before on other issues, but this one was so significant that I thought I'd flag it. And then, we use that tactic on many other issues as well.
I'll tell you, my day job is in private land conservation. And before the pandemic, I went to D.C. for this thing called the Land Trust Alliance's advocacy days. And to be completely honest, I went in kind of pessimistic, thinking what you just said, oh, these people don't care. I'm not from the oil and gas industry. I don't have a lot of money. I can't make any difference here. But I met with every single senator's office from Colorado, the 2 senators, and then all the representatives. And it was one of the most inspiring and optimistic trips that I've ever been on, because they all listen, everybody from Senator Cory Gardner, who's no longer in office, to the newest representative out of Boulder. And they all listen and they were all engaged. And I feel like with land conservation, for the most part, it's a bipartisan issue that they're kind of glad to see you when they come in the door, because there may be different ideas about how we get there. But, most people, unless you're just a maniac, you're interested in land conservation. So I think that I love hearing about the DC stuff. And so that brings me, when we were getting this scheduled a few weeks ago, you were in DC, and then I think you're going back next week. And so you're always going to DC. So when you're going next week, what are you going to be doing? What specifically are you talking to these people about? Because I think it's important for people to really understand, these trips to senators, these phone calls and these conversations, they do make a difference. They really do. And this is coming from a former pessimist, a non-believer. So yeah. What, talk about your plan for next week.
Sure. Well, first I'll kind of react. I think that, what you felt in Washington, D.C., and that engagement is absolutely powerful. And I think you're exactly right that they're listening because these issues, are bipartisan. I mean, that Great American Outdoors Act that I talked about, that was overwhelmingly bipartisan. There was a few that voted against it in the Senate and a small handful in the House that voted against it. And then the president signed it into law. And, if you look at our politics right now in this country in particular, it's very divisive. And so finding something that we can all come together on is absolutely amazing. And you described that perfectly, that public lands and waters, we might not agree on the exact path what that looks like, but we all agree that it's an important issue for us to work on. So thank you for that. So next week, and I think I would say that there's an issue that we're focusing on called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And so we just talked about access. That is a huge leg of the stool. You think about, all the money that we as hunters put into conservation and the management of our species through Pittman-Robertson dollars or duck stamp dollars or our license fees that we pay at a state level. And so that's another leg of the stool. And then this third leg is this kind of wildlife that we've really forgotten about. And, these are the species that make up the community. So the kingfisher or the American dipper or the great blue heron, they're all obligate to water that I, see when I'm out fishing or duck hunting. Mm-hmm. They're very important to the ecosystem, but they've been really forgotten. And so what this legislation is trying to do is keep common species common, and then those other species off the endangered species list. And that really is trying to keep them out of the emergency room.
Yep.
And, once they go under the endangered species list and they're in the emergency room, it costs a lot more money and there's a lot more regulations. And so we like to say, it's worth a pound of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so that's really what we were going to be working on next week. And so we got meetings set up just like you did with multiple Senate and House offices. We'll also be working and meeting with the administration to encourage them to play a more active role in this historic piece of legislation. While they can't vote on it, they can definitely talk about the positive side of this. And so to me, like that's what we'll be doing next week. I'll be meeting with some reporters while I'm there as well. And then the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is having their annual kind of gala or banquet.
Oh yeah, I've heard that's awesome.
It's amazing. And this year they're going to be celebrating, I think they're celebrating 20 years of existence. And Jim Range, who was the original chairman, has now passed away. They're going to be celebrating him. And I worked for TRCP back when Range was the chairman, and it's going to be an awesome celebration. It's always great, but I think this year in particular, the 20-year anniversary and celebrating Jim in particular, is going to be an awesome event. So that's a smattering besides, some of the local food joints that I'll be hitting and that I have learned over the years. And this trip, actually, Ed, I'm bringing my 13-year-old daughter along with me.
Oh, awesome. Has she ever been to DC?
This is her first time. And
so, dude, that's awesome.
I can't be more excited about that. And she'll be going to meetings with me, all the meetings, just like, she's there. She's gregarious. I'm guessing she'll open her mouth, but I'm hoping that she's just awed by the kind of, the essence of Washington, D.C., and then gets inspired about getting engaged, just like I did a long time ago.
Well, from a parenting standpoint, that's, obviously the conservation standpoint is huge, but from a parenting standpoint, think about what you're going to get in her head about how you can make a difference. Because, I think I was 40 when I went up there. It's all pessimistic and then had this change of heart. So, that's great, man. That's inspiring. Kind of on the other side. So you're obviously very proactive on this issue. And that's one of the things I love about BHA is just you guys are very proactive. You're action oriented. You've got big ideas, but you're just as focused on the execution of the ideas and kind of mobilizing all these members you have and people that are passionate about it. But like when you're sitting around thinking about kind of worst case scenario or like what is the biggest threat to public land? Because anybody who's halfway engaged in the outdoor space, whether you're a mountain biker or you're a birder or you're angler, whatever, big game hunter, there's all this endless talk about threats to public lands. Like, what is the most scary thing to you? Like, what do you think is the biggest threat that people need to be aware of that they may not be aware of? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I totally do. And, I could talk about some issues, but instead of like a litany or like trying to figure out what is the most important one that maybe people aren't thinking about, I go like broader and I just say apathy, Ed.
Yeah.
Like people, again, and I mentioned it already, some people don't think their voice counts. And so they're like, I don't even know how to get involved in this, and I don't have any money. And so how am I going to compete with, big money interest? Well, you're not unless you raise your voice. And by the way, when you raise your voice and your friend is raising your voice and your neighbor is raising their voice, we, the people, run this democracy if we speak up. And so that's like the first thing I would say. But apathy, it's like we're living in some pretty good times right now. Wildlife populations, at least the huntable species, the majority of them are, doing quite well. We just passed this Great American Outdoors Act. And so people are like, man, we've got money for access. We've got money for conservation. What else do we need? And the idea is that what we have now, we would not have unless there was leaders before us that had foresight. And I think that whatever role we're playing right now helps perpetuate that legacy into the future. And so we don't get to stop. And if we do stop, like things like special places like the boundary waters, let's say in northern Minnesota that has been threatened by a mine that's a quarter mile south of it when all that water goes north, like we only have to screw that up once and we never get it back. Right. Like there's a bill that Mike Lee has right now, and he's trying to sell public lands in the name of more affordable housing, which I think the affordable housing question is a good one. But this is just the nose underneath the tent. And so if something like that goes forward without, proper scrutiny, like we lose and we never really get it back. And so this apathy piece of either I don't know how to get involved or times are pretty good, that's probably what makes me scared the most, is because I just studied this, this conservation kind of history, which we have a long Native American, I would say, culture that is engaged in conservation for a long time in this country. And then you look at the modern day kind of conservation, which is about 150 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And with that modern piece, we've made some great strides. We've made some mistakes. Now it's just our time. And like, this is not something that is just given to us. It's been something that's been fought for. And now it's our time to continue to fight, and so that Sydney, my young daughter, when she gets inspired out in Washington, D.C. this next week, that she's got something to fight for, because this is never over. And that sounds, daunting in some ways, or, too big. But it also, to me, it gives me solace just knowing that these trenches that we're in right now, or this arena that we're in right now, there's plenty of people that have been there before, and we're just carrying on that tradition. So that's a long answer, Ed, but I love apathy to me is like that's the thing I get scared about most.
Now, you mentioned that the affordable housing thing, Mike Lee, and he's the Utah senator. And so something like that, just to zoom in on that, because I think that's important. Yep. That is on the surface, that sounds like a very reasonable thing. Like, we need more affordable housing, but totally. And this is kind of a rhetorical question, but when you see that and this idea that we're going to take public lands, basically privatize them and turn them into something else, that's just kind of like, it's testing. It's like poking and poking and poking and then finding this weak spot. And then do you see that as that's like the dam breaks once you can get away, even if it's for something as great as affordable housing and as needed as affordable housing, if you make the exception that once, then all of a sudden it's going to be open to any private interest. Is that kind of the threat there, or the worry?
Absolutely. And, somebody like Mike Lee that has made a career out of trying to divest public lands, like, this is just the latest iteration. And he's introduced this bill a couple years ago, and now he's doing it again. And, when he gets up in front of a crowd and says, we haven't been able to, divest public lands yet, but, I'm in it for the long haul, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm in it for the long haul, and like, we'll get it done someday. Like, he truly believes that. Like, he truly believes that we should not have public lands that belong to all of us. And so when you see a bill like this, just where it's coming from, Senator Mike Lee, I think, gives us pause. Then you start looking at the details, and there's no guarantee that this is used for affordable housing, which is what is being talked about. It's basically giving this to states or to municipalities to develop housing, but that could be, for multi-million-dollar folks that just want their chunk of paradise. And so you have to look at the details of these things. And, and to me, there's already things on the books. There's a thing called the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act, which is a mouthful, but it helps, in these situations where we want to divest some land because it makes sense. And then that money, instead of going to the treasury, it stays in an account. And so we can use that to consolidate access or conservation priorities in other places. And so it's and has a lot of scrutiny, I would say, from the public as well. And so within that program, we already have the ability to do this. And let's just figure out how we can do that for affordable housing, which, again, I think is not a bad idea. Let's just think about where that is in time and place, and then don't open up that Pandora's box, to let other things, creep in that divest our public lands in a more significant way.
So just as far as your operating system, like as a leader of this big organization, as somebody who likes to get stuff done, how do you balance being skeptical? Like you hear this thing and on the surface, oh, affordable housing, that sounds great. But like, how do you balance being skeptical without just careening into being like an angry pessimist? Because you're obviously very optimistic, you're very solution oriented, but like, just have you figured out kind of a way to be a healthy level of skeptical without getting jaded?
I maybe it's my personality, but glass is always half full with me, and
nice.
and so. And always has been my entire life. And that may give me blind spots in some places, but it helps me live as well. If I really, the threats that we have are numerous, and we haven't even talked about climate change yet. There's just so many of these big things. And if you took all that on, man, it'd feel like we have, there's no path forward. And to me, like, that is just, it's not a great place to live. And I think that, we have a lot of positive things going on, and then we have a lot of challenges. But these challenges that we have right now, market killing was going on, for wildlife at the turn of, at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s. We almost wiped wildlife off the face of this country. Like that was a big problem. And we fixed that. Back in the dirty 30s when the lid's coming off the prairie and you've got the Dust Bowl happening where ships are, hundreds of miles off the East Coast and getting dumped big piles of dirt on their decks from storms in the Midwest. Like that was a major problem. Guess what? We got together and we solved that. And so to me, whatever these challenges are, like, I guess I'm always trying to frame them in, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Because if we sit here and let the weight of the world come on our shoulders, which we absolutely could, these things would feel crushing. And, I think the other way to look at that is like, these are our challenges for our times. We've done this before and we're going to do it again. And so that's really, I guess, my frame as myself personally. And I think that's the way we look at it as an organization as well, is always trying to find a solution forward. And, an example of that, a real quick one, would be down in Arkansas, where there was a piece of ground that the University of Arkansas owned, and it was like 6,000 acres. It was used for studies, for their school, but then also for duck hunting. They were gifted to it by the Forest Service way back in the day. They decided they had a private landowner or private donor that wanted to buy this piece and make it into a private duck hunting club. And while the university needed money, that would have taken public land away from the public. And so our chapter got involved down there and stopped that sale. But now is working on this solution, which is the university gets paid, and that property stays in public ownership in perpetuity. And so, while there's the hair on fire, we got to stop, and like world seems against us, like that chapter down in Arkansas found a solution at the same time. And I think that's something that we're looking for all the time.
I love that outlook. And that's the common outlook of everybody I've had on this podcast, no matter what they're in, whether they're an artist or whether they're a rancher or whether they're in the conservation business. Like they've all got this, the default is optimism and action. And I'm in the conservation world, and I would say if at least I used to be kind of a default pessimist, but I've surrounded myself by optimists and I act like an optimist. And now I think maybe I am at least like 51% optimist. So I'm on my way. So thank you for your influence on me. That leads me to my next question. You mentioned Arkansas, and as you mentioned earlier, you guys have state chapters all over the place. And so how important is that to have these on the ground state organizations that can identify issues that are happening versus being just like strictly a top-down, organization where you've got an office and you're kind of throwing out what needs to happen from the top down? It seems like you guys are more of on the ground, local, identify local challenges and figure out solutions. How important has that been for BHA?
Oh, it's the secret sauce. I mean, a lot of people are like, what is behind the success of BHA? And it's the people. And I say that is that, we empower our volunteers. We provide guardrails, and that's those guardrails simply are that, access to public lands and waters, and then the quality of fish and wildlife habitat when you get there. And so those guardrails are pretty wide. And so we let our volunteers really, find a path of what they're most excited about within that and what is happening on the ground. And, there's people are more interested in what's going on in their backyard than anything. And so I think that engagement is absolutely vital. And then, going to some of these large federal things that we've been talking about is that, again, we live in a democracy and the people matter in that democracy. And so, a senator from Arkansas, a senator from Iowa, a senator from North Carolina could care less about what I say from Montana. They want to know what their constituents think. And they not only they want to know that, they want to learn. And so, you experienced that when you went out to DC. We've been doing that a lot. We've learned this through the pandemic, but we're continuing that. Is like Zoom calls or Teams calls with senators that they can have with their constituents back home. And so you don't have the expense of flying people out to Washington, D.C. You still get the face-to-face with the senator, and the senator loves it because they get time with their constituents. And so that grassroots power that some organizations use that to raise money, some organizations use that, when one thing is happening out in D.C. and they turn it on, we really use that every single day. And whether that's, again, for issues on the ground, stewardship projects on the ground, to policies at a state level, to all the way out to Washington, D.C., the common theme there is people stepping up and getting engaged. And that, to me, is the secret sauce of BHA and absolutely essential and something that we will continue to try to enhance.
Well, I've gotten to know some of the guys associated with BHA here in Colorado Springs, and then our mutual friend Adam Gall, I've gotten to know him pretty well. And he actually took me on my first ever elk hunt this January out on the Western Slope. And it was, I'm 44 and I keep saying over and over, but it was like a life-changing experience at age 44. And from everything from the actual act of hunting, and it was a tame, it was a private land hunt, no big deal, but it was to the act of, processing the animal. And now last night we had elk enchiladas with my little girls, and they love it. And so, I had done a lot of bird hunting, but late to the game with big game hunting. So what does BHA do? What kind of resource can BHA be for people like me who maybe don't know somebody like Adam, but want to get into hunting? Because I know there are a lot of people who want to at least try it at least for the food procurement part of it. But what kind of programs, if anything, does BHA have to encourage new hunters?
I love that you hung out with Adam and that
he's
you were
awesome.
Successful. Adam is one of the greatest human beings that I know. And again,
I agree.
Just the energy that Adam and the selflessness and the countless hours that he has volunteered to BHA, I am forever thankful. And so I'm so glad that you got to connect with him. Back to your question. So there's a lot of folks that are engaged in kind of teaching kids how to hunt and fish. And, whether that's the Green Wing program at Ducks Unlimited, there's stuff at Trout Unlimited, Wild Turkey Federation, Elk Foundation. There's a lot of stuff focused on kids. And I think that's amazing work. But we're really focused on kind of college and above. And so I talked about those college kind of clubs that we had across the country. We're on 26 campuses. Well, part of the thing that they do is they help, bring new hunters along. We have the University of Montana here in Missoula where we started. And folks, they come to Montana partly because of the outdoors. Well, they either grew up hunting someplace else and now it's a new state, different species, different rules, they need some help. Or they came to Montana, like you, love the outdoors, but have no idea how to engage in this new pursuit. And a lot of that, like you said, is based on food. And so we have a program that we started here at the University of Montana that's now, in many different places called Hunting for Sustainability, where, we'll take college kids out and teach them, kind of on a weekend, gun safety. And then most of the time we'll have an animal that we can help, do a butchering class with, and then teach rules and regulations, and then the importance of, engaging as a conservationist. And Adam has held, he's hosted a couple of these at his place there in Colorado. Those are start with college kids, but then are open to the public larger than that. So that's our Hunting for Sustainability program. Women in the Woods is another program that we have that started there in Colorado that has been quite successful. One that I'm really excited about is this next year is we're going into 5 urban centers. So San Francisco, Portland, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, and New York City. So we're going into an urban center and we're doing these workshops that I just described to you. And we're calling them Explore Hunting. And so that's going to be a way for many more people, especially in an urban setting, to be able to attend. The last thing I guess I will tell you is that during the pandemic, we did a bunch of online kind of training courses. And one of those courses that I'll call out was a Learn How to Squirrel Hunt. And, squirrel hunting was not something I grew up with, we chased around big game and birds, but it's this universal thing that anybody can do across the country. The barrier to entry is very, very low. And the opportunities to, chase those critters around, you'll see squirrels, you may not kill one, but you'll see squirrels. And so that was attended by 600 people, 600 people took an online Learn How to Hunt squirrel course. And so the appetite's there, and we're just trying to figure out different ways to do it. So we'll do this online, and then we'll do this in person, and we're trying to double down. But again, that kind of demographic of, I would say, college age to about your and I's age. About 70% of our members are 45 and younger, and so we're really trying to concentrate on that 18 to 45 and this kind of new hunter, kind of emerging hunter, I would say. And people call it an adult onset hunting, which I don't like. It sounds like a disease. I haven't come up with a better name, Ed, but it's again that the way you described it is like you hunted birds and all of a sudden you gotten into big game. It's been this big awakening and you did it mostly for food. Like that conversation is happening all over the country. And so we're trying to provide opportunities for people not only to think about it, but to actually get out there and do it.
Well, my experience was just awesome, and all credit goes to Adam and his wife Anna. I mean, it was unbelievable, and I'm addicted now. You said a disease, like it could be considered an addiction problem,
but a
like
healthy one.
Healthy ones, exactly. But Adam told me a story about a guy he had come out, because Adam specializes in new hunters. That's one of the things he does. But he said that he had a guy come. I think the guy lived maybe in San Francisco or Silicon Valley or somewhere, and he came out, hunted, was successful, and then did the whole processing, which is what one other thing Adam specializes in, and Anna. And the guy had a wonderful experience. He got 150 pounds of meat, but when it was over, he said, "This was a life-changing experience. I'm so happy to have all this meat, and I don't think I'm ever going to do it again. But I'm so glad I did it." And I think that's even more powerful than me, who's like, "Yeah, I want to do it every year now." I mean, this guy had it. It was just kind of an education about really how difficult it is to get meat from nature onto your plate. And so I highly recommend it to anybody who eats meat. I think everybody should do it. It's, I'm going to be doing it a lot. I got a lot to learn though, but I got hopefully like 40 more years maybe.
Which is exciting.
Oh yeah. And I'm a member of BHA. I joined it like while I was at Adam's house. So sorry It took me so long, but I'm in.
Thank you.
I also want to be a lifetime member, because that deal with the gun, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I like to say you can't afford not to become a lifetime member, because
you really can't. It's kind of like an unbelievable deal. I'll have links to that so people can click through. I want to hear about you personally. I know you, unlike me, I'm from North Carolina. I came out west, and I'm crowding to join up, making traffic bad in Colorado. But you're from here. Tell me where you grew up and kind of how the outdoors played a role in your life as a kid growing up.
Sure. So I'm lucky to have grown up here in Montana. My first family member was born in Montana in 1872. So we've been here for a while. And both my grandparents, were in the town that I grew up in. And so
what town?
It's Missoula. And
So
where our headquarters are now today, but Missoula's, it's been featured in, river runs through it. We've got the Blackfoot River, which is famous, but then the Clark Fork and the Bitterroot right here in town. And so I lived like about 3 miles out of town of a place called Patty Canyon, and our property was bordered by Forest Service.
Nice.
So grew up with horses. My grandfather had steers once in a while. He lived across the road. My playground was really that national forest and our own private land. And so I grew up outside, and, I didn't have a TV back then. And so I go to school and kids would kind of make fun of me, and I felt ostracized because I didn't know what the latest, was on whatever TV show it was. But then those kids would come up to my house for like a play date or for my birthday, and then kind of like I would see their eyes like open up and think that the stuff that I do on a daily basis was like the coolest thing they'd ever seen. Yep. So I think like just that immersion, like in like our private land, but also the public land that surrounded us as a kid was amazing. My dad, there's pictures of me on his back when I was 3 years old, and he's fishing. He took me to the duck blind when I was 5 years old, and he, later when I was like 10, I'd have a BB gun with him, and I'd think I could shoot a duck with, a single shot BB gun. But so he immersed me early, and my mom, really got me out hiking early. And so that part of our upbringing is really, I think, similar to a lot of Montanans, just because, that was the lifestyle, like we were in the woods and on the water all the time. At the same time, my parents were the first full-time conservation lobbyists at the state legislature here in Montana.
Oh, wow.
And so there was that. My dad went to law school late, and then when he got out of law school, that's when conservation easements were really starting to become much more popular, I would say. And so he was a preeminent lawyer, I would say, on conservation easements here in the state. There's a place called the Teller Wildlife Refuge that he set aside. This is south of Missoula in Corvallis, Montana. And then he was the first lawyer for the Elk Foundation.
Oh,
and
cool.
So when they started, in 1985, and then my father passed away in 95, but like those 10 years, like he was heavily involved in that organization and the early successes that they had. And so I say all this, I was definitely into the hunting and fishing and being outside. The kind of conservation and the politics kind of that my parents were involved in, that all kind of came to me through osmosis, I would say. Like it wasn't my jam. Like I wasn't like, this is what I want to do when I grow up. And then my father passed away in 95, and I was 19 at that point. And that was like, it's the most significant thing that ever happened in my life and has created this gigantic hole never to be filled. But at the same time, it really kind of centered me and had me figure out what I wanted to do in life. And so that upbringing, being surrounded by parents who were civically engaged, the conservation minds that I was around. I mean, Jim Posowitz, if you know that name, he drove my mom to the hospital the day I was born.
Wow.
Because my dad was gone. And so here's this iconic dude that has wrote 5 books about conservation. Like, he's my godfather. And so I was lucky to be around people. But ultimately it took a pretty significant, event in my life to really focus me. And that happened, at an age where, I didn't figure it out right away, but it helped form, I think, the path that I'm on now. And, would I change that? I'd bring my dad back in a second, but sure. I've also, it's been great to find a kind of a silver lining in that whole thing.
That's a powerful story, man. Thanks for sharing it. I'm sorry about your loss, but it's I'm sure he'd couldn't be prouder. I mean, holy cow! Like what you're doing, it's so important. So wait, so you go to school, and then what's your first job out of college?
Sure. So, and I kind of skipped over that. So when my dad passed away, I was out in Seattle I was getting a business administration degree, and I think that was just because I thought the advisor was cute. So I come back to town and I get a wildlife biology degree from the University of Montana. And I would say, I loved, like I did an owl study where I was trapping long-eared owls, loved that work in the field and just handling wildlife and participating in a study that was, long-term study to help out their longevity. But when I was about a senior, I was like, man, this is where my head started to click. And I was like, I really want to do larger things versus just focus on one species. Yeah. And so graduated school with a wildlife biology degree. And then right out of school, volunteered for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Alliance at that point. It's now the partnership. And that was a fledgling organization that Bob Munson at that point was leading. He was one of the founders of the Elk Foundation. He was one of the original folks that with my dad helped, create the Elk Foundation. And so he's magnanimous. I got to, volunteer for him and then work part-time. And then Jim Range took over for him. Or I guess took over as the chairmanship, and there was another guy by the name of Fred Myers. He used to work for the NRA, that was the executive director of TRCP at that point when it became the partnership. Yep. And so I at that point, man, what an awesome place. I just count my lucky stars. I ended up being the national grassroots coordinator for TRCP. And so I got to, help build that program. I also got to meet, folks like Howard Vinson, who was just retiring this year from Pheasants Forever after, 3 decades of service to that organization. But I met him, right when I first started my career. And so being able to meet these folks that are engaged, I think early on, it was super influential for me just as a mentorship, but also gave me access to figure out what are the things that we can contribute to this conservation legacy? What is the role that I could potentially play? And so that started at TRCP, went to the National Wildlife Federation for 8 years, and then, been at BHA now for 9. And so I'm dating myself, but it's 22 years now I've been working on.
Can you believe that? Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy. I don't feel that old. I'll tell you, at 47, I feel like I'm 25 in a lot of ways.
Same.
Yeah, which is great. It's great. And like you, I think I used to, since my dad passed away at such a young age, he passed away when he was 45. I didn't think I'd live much longer past that. But like you said earlier, I hope to have another 40 years. That's the way I'm looking at this. And, Jim Posowitz, who took my mom to the hospital and was a great mentor of mine, he passed away a couple years ago. And he wrote his last op-ed 2 weeks before he passed away. And it was about protecting the Smith River, which is here in Montana, from a mine. Yeah. And it's a pretty high bar, right?
I love it.
And I don't know if I'll make it till I'm 85. Me write my last op-ed then. But man, is that inspirational? And so, that's really the path. It starts with the upbringing, but then it brings you to where I'm at right now.
Well, you've had all these unbelievable mentors, everybody from obviously your father to just these kind of conservation luminaries that you crossed paths with early on and early in your career. Like, what's the common theme of all those people? Like if you had to, and maybe you don't even think about this kind of stuff, but I'm always trying to figure out, like, you look at all these badasses that are doing all this cool stuff and have been so effective. I mean, I think, obviously they're optimistic. Obviously they're hell bent on action. Is there any other commonalities you see between all these folks, and yourself included? I mean, I know you're humble. You probably won't answer that, but like, what are the commonalities of these people that get shit done? Excuse my language.
That should be a t-shirt. You're asking me off the cuff, and I guess like what I would say, and you've already mentioned two of them, but I think in addition to that, and these are going to maybe sound silly to some people, but like, I think the obvious one is getting outside. Like, these aren't people that, all the mentors that I've had in my life aren't people that didn't continue to get outside and really touch and feel the resource, right? And really know what they're fighting for. I think sometimes that people forget that, and they get disconnected and they lose touch. And so I would say the common theme, I mean, God, Jim Range was try to keep up with him going grouse hunting, or like, when he was fishing, like this super intense, like he was a very busy man, but when he got the chance, like he immersed himself. And so I think part of that is the being connected to the land. But the other piece of that is, no matter how hard charging you are, you need a break. And there's no better place to find solace and to get a true break than out in the outdoors. And I would say hunting and fishing, because I don't think about anything else but that activity that I'm in at that point. So that's a major one.
That's Theodore Roosevelt. They talk about how hard he went, but his biographer, Edmund Morris, said he was also a energetic sleeper. Like he got his rest, I mean, he went hard in everything, including rest. So that's cool to hear you say that.
Totally. And thank you for reminding me that rest is important. The other one is like with humor. This stuff that we're dealing with is super serious. And sometimes you have, you feel like there's a quote unquote an enemy on the other side, right? And at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And no matter, how much you may dislike tactics or, the way, which is another way to say the way people do things. But man, we're all human beings, and like let's poke fun at kind of the situation sometimes, and then focus on the serious stuff. But I think that piece of humor, when I think about my dad, I think about Jim Posowitz, I think about Jim Range, like all of them had it, and I think that's important that we don't take ourselves too seriously or the situations too seriously. Yes, they're super important, but let's have some levity in this as well. And so I think those are keys, and then I think the last thing I guess I would say, and you're making me think about this, and I'm speaking out loud, but like I also like this underlying theme is that we have something unique here in North America. It didn't happen by accident, and it's not going to be carried forward by accident either. And that while, it belongs to all of us, not all maybe have the same experiences or feel as comfortable as maybe I do that, because I grew up here in Montana, and hunting, fishing has just been a way of life. Like, how do we include all people in conservation? And I think that between those three, and I could name many others, but I think like those three things is what I point out, is getting out in the resource. I think this ability to have fun and levity while you're doing it. And then that overarching idea that it's not for me. I'm not being selfish about this. This is for everybody else. And I think like that is like a super important, like all three of those are really important.
That's your book. You can write a book about that one day. I'll be your agent. So big event coming up for you guys up in Missoula, the Rendezvous. And I really wanted to come, and your badass coworker, Rachel Schmidt, invited me, and I've got family obligations. I can't make it, but I'm going to come the following year. I've wanted to come forever. Talk about that for folks who aren't familiar with it.
Sure. So it's May 12 through 14. It's our annual gathering. We call it the Rendezvous. And I think that the idea of a rendezvous is really bringing all of our people together. And, that currency that I talked about earlier, the people, like we're all spread out across North America. And when we get chances to come together and swap stories and share ideas, have a good time, with people that are like-minded, it just fills the bucket. I say it over and over again about Rendezvous. It just fills my bucket and gives energy. And so that people walk away from the event, with just this overwhelming sense of, I think, being part of a community. And then what am I going to do personally, to carry that on? And that to me is like Rendezvous. And so how do we accomplish that? I think, we're building a community. And so that starts, it's Thursday through Sunday. And that starts with like bringing people together over food. And, we have a welcoming reception that we have for all the volunteers and members on Thursday night, as well as like a really fancy dinner. I call it the Field to Table, which is the most amazing dinner on the planet, where chefs cook wild game, and you get to have some of the best food that you've ever had, and paired with beverages as well. Then we go into like our Friday, and Friday is really like a lot of seminars, panels, and then, that good time, we go into our brew fest. That's that night. I think we have something like 60 different breweries here in Montana that are participating, and some of them are only doing, like runs for this. So it's you can only get some of the beer at this actual event. So that's that night. Then we'll do our storytelling that night. And I am like, storytelling has been happening since the first fire was started, like way back in the day.
Oh yeah, and that's what we humans are built for, stories.
We're built for it, right? And I don't think we do it enough. And so we've been doing storytelling now for 5 or 6 years, like as an event. And this one on Friday night is absolutely awesome. We've got Tyson Running Wolf with the Blackfeet Nation who's coming down. He's a state senator as well. He helped us break down a bison at last year's rendezvous, which was awesome. But he'll be telling a story. Rue Mapp from Outdoor Afro is going to be telling a story.
Oh, cool.
David Wise, who's a Olympian. He's a 4-time Olympian. He's won gold medals, silver medals. I think he just won a silver medal this year. And then Clay Hayes, who just won Alone. I don't know if you know that TV show, but like, you have all these like Survivor kind of shows.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that show. That's scary.
Alone is like the real deal, right?
It's scary. Yeah. I wouldn't want any part in that. And I've done a lot of crazy outdoor stuff.
I sit there, Ed, and I watch that thing and I'm like, man, I could do it. And I don't know if I could do it. But so like he won this whole thing. I think he was out almost 100 days.
Oh.
So he's going to be telling a story, and he's one of our seminar givers. And so that happens Friday night. I'm super excited about that.
And Mark Kenyon doing one too?
Mark Kenyon, yeah. So the lineup is so amazing. So
Mark Kenyon, it's like stacked up. That's
it is. It's a good lineup. And so Mark Kenyon is going to be doing one as well. And Mark, for those that don't know Mark Kenyon, he's with Meat Eater and is one of the premier, I would say, whitetail hunters in the country. But he's going to be telling a story. He's also been a part of our chapter for a long time.
He's a good writer too.
He's amazing. And so storytelling is Friday night. And then Saturday, we have more seminars. I would say that we're going to be doing a bunch of cooking seminars that day. Some of the chefs that are helping us for our high-end dinner on Thursday. We'll be doing some a duck hunting seminar, which I'm super stoked about, led by Jonathan Wilkins, who's on our chapter down in Arkansas. And then we'll kind of go into some more panels that afternoon. One of them that we're going to be talking about is just kind of threats to the North American wildlife model. And, I don't know how much you've dove into the North American model, but, I think there's these 7 principles, and one of them that we're real concerned about is the privatization of wildlife. And so we'll be having that conversation on Saturday. And then that leads into a conversation about corner crossing. I don't know if you've been following what's going on.
No, I have. I used to be in the real estate business, selling ranches, so I was familiar with that. It all never made sense. And so I'm glad y'all are on top of that.
So Hal Herring, our podcast extraordinaire, will be holding a live podcast on that. And then later that night, we'll celebrate some folks through some awards. That's kind of the more traditional part of our weekend. And then we'll have a huge bonfire. Last year we had 3 bonfires. So we had one on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. This year we're holding it all for Saturday night. And you can read into that if you want to or not. Bonfires make you stay up very late. And so we're having the campfire late at night on Saturday, and that will go into the wee hours. But and then we'll do some cleanup and stuff on Sunday. But it's a great weekend. Again, like there's lots of learning opportunities. But I think the thing that I hear most about, one, people that join BHA, but then people that actually come to Rendezvous, is they're like, I'm just so excited there's more people that think the way I do.
Yep.
And so it's this way of just kind of, again, providing kind of some of that energy and filling that back bucket up to go back and, engage in what's happening on the ground in whatever state or province you come from, and then how you use that kind of knowledge to then work, with the bigger policies out in Washington, D.C. So it's exciting. I'm like beaming, smiling about it. It's sneaking up on us. It's going to be here in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to come, and now I want to come even more, but that'll just, I promise I'll be there 23. I will. I'll be the least qualified hunter at the entire thing, but I'll be very enthusiastic. So
now, see, and like least qualified. I mean, I don't even really. I mean, I get why you're saying that because you are a new big game hunter.
Yes.
But I would tell you that like the one thing I didn't say about this is all the people that you'll meet, like they're gonna want to take you to X spot. I mean, you're going to have more trips than you know what to do with when you come to this, because people at BHA, they want to share kind of their opportunities with everybody else. And so that's another thing that comes out. And you as a new hunter, like, please don't be intimidated by that. Like, our crowd is ready to, one, learn things from you, because I've been hunting my entire life and I still learn things every single time I'm out in the woods and can learn things from others. But also they want to pass on that knowledge, man. So please don't be intimidated by that.
Well, and I'll say, people give me a hard time because they say I'm too self-deprecating, but like what I honestly say about BHA is, I mean, this is 100% true, is I don't think you need to be even an active hunter or angler to support your work. Because like, if you're the kind of person that you like to enjoy public lands, whether it's, on a hike or going out looking at birds or going camping, like, the work y'all are doing really, really carries over to everybody. I mean, like, there are people who have no interest in hunting, no interest in fishing, and they benefit from the work y'all are doing. And $35 a year, like, that's a damn good investment as far as I'm concerned. And it's not, I mean, I think, the hunting and angling is in the title, but in my experience, everybody, literally every single person I've ever met that's associated with it is welcoming. They're enthusiastic. They're passionate about public lands, no matter how you enjoy it. And so, like, I just want people to be that's from my perspective. I want people to be very clear. Like, you could have no interest in ever hunting and go to the rendezvous, and you would walk away so energized and optimistic about things. So that's my non-requested endorsement.
Well,
that might be a bad thing. You might be like, I don't want Ed vouching for me.
No, Ed, I think it's amazing. And I think that, I'll give you a story. There was a woman that became a life member of ours. And, I ask all life members, not all, but like, I'd love to have the conversation about, well, why'd you sign up for life?
Yeah.
She's like, I don't hunt and fish, but I ride long distance, like, equestrian races.
Oh, wow.
And those equestrian races happen on public lands. Yep. And she's like, the work that you're doing to maintain trails, the work that you're doing to make sure the agencies, have the money to make, the work that you're doing to make sure that, quite frankly, public lands stay in public hands. She's like, that's why I became a life member, because you guys are doing the work every single day. And while I may not hunt and fish, like, the work that you're doing benefits me. And so just, it's a small snapshot, but I would say in a larger perspective, this conservation legacy that we are all proud of in this country, we will not carry that forward just as hunters and anglers as we go into like the next, I would say, chapter. We have to be talking to folks that enjoy the outdoors from all different, I guess, entry points. And, we have a commonality, and, and that's being in the outdoors. And if we can't get there, I mean, this is for even people that, live in a big, huge urban base that may never get out on public lands. Clean air and clean water is important to you, and the public lands and public waters are providing that to you every single day. And so, to me, this organization is open to everybody, but I appreciate you putting a finer point on that.
Yeah, I'm so impressed with everything y'all are doing. I get more impressed every year, or really every month, as you guys just take action. All right, last question. Whenever I get around smart people, I always want to know what books they're reading or what books they have read that have kind of influence their worldview, influence their career. Can you give me a few recommendations that I can put on the website so I can read them, and then other people can click through and read them?
Sure. I'm a big Theodore Roosevelt buff. And so I think
me too. It's kind of crossed over into weird on my end. Like, I'm straight up obsessed. Like, his family might put out a cease and desist on me soon.
And so I think like anything that talks about that history, I think is absolutely, like, it's essential. Right. And so folks, like, I mean, there's so many. You mentioned Morris's book, but there's like plenty others right out there. So I think reading those is important. I would say one that he wrote himself personally was I may get this wrong, but it's like Ranch Life and Hunting Traditions.
Yeah.
That he wrote, and there's one story in there where like I think they catch some poachers, like, and they traveled like tens and tens of miles down this river to catch these poachers that poached some or like rustlers that stole some cows. But it gives you an idea of his connection, I think, to the outdoors, which is talked a lot about in his biographies, but this is in his own words, and so I think that's a good one. There's also another one called Sportsmen and Conservation by Rieger, Rieger.
Oh, nice. I have not read that one.
And I think I'm trying to remember the title of that one, but it's basically Sportsmen and Conservation. And it talks about like kind of, it talks about Roosevelt and Pinchot and kind of that era, but it really goes farther and deeper into that and into some of the things like the market killing as well as the dirty 30s. And so I think that's a really good one just for history. So those are a couple that I would tell you about. One I just read a while ago, but it's called Where the Crawdads Sing.
My wife read that and loved it.
Dude, it's got an awesome natural history in it. That's one of the reasons why I loved it most. There's a great story in there as well.
Yeah.
That has some twists and turns, but the natural history, like it takes place in North Carolina, and which would be a great connection for you. But like,
sure,
like just the way they describe the natural history, like is amazing. And there's a lot of similarities. Like I have a lot of things from the outdoors in my office that are rocks and sticks and feathers and all sorts of things, right? And that book is amazing. And then one I just picked up that I'm starting to dive into, but it's by Thomas Holliday, Halliday, and it's called The Other Lands. And it talks about like kind of extinctions that have happened previous to where we are right now, and just describing those landscapes and like the species that made them up. And learning kind of from those extinctions and maybe potentially on things that are going on now, but really like the flora and fauna that, my hometown of Missoula, like this used to be a tropical paradise. We had dinosaurs running everywhere. At some point we had a huge lake that was, called Glacier Lake, Missoula. And so just finding out more about history, I would say. So that's another one I'm excited about. So sorry to ramble on the books, but I've got I got one in my hand all the time. Somebody just sent me a book about conservation in Africa. The author just sent me that book, and I'm going to read that one after that. So I'm just constantly reading. And to be honest, it's something I wish I could do more of.
Well, that's another common theme. People in this podcast, they all read like crazy. And so I've got a way too long list. Those are awesome. Well, man, I want to be respectful of your time. You got a lot more important stuff to do than talking to me. But I want to thank you for the work you're doing with BHA. It's super impactful. It's important for me and my girls and generations to come, but then also just how you go about doing it. It's inspiring to me, and I really take a lot of motivation from you and your team, and everybody I know that's associated with BHA is just an all-star, and it just makes me feel better about the world, and it gives me good kind of role models as to how to approach some of these challenging problems. So thank you. I'll look forward to hanging in person no later than Rendezvous 23.
Good. Well, I'll hold you to that. And, I'll say thank you to as well. I mean, you just listed off kind of all the people, and like whether that starts with me or other staff or volunteers or members that you've met, but you're also part of this as a member as well. And that's a huge thank you for me that you're engaging with BHA, you're using this bully pulpit that you have, using Roosevelt's words, with your podcast to spread this message. Like, thank you. We have a lot of stuff to do together, Ed, and this is just the beginning.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.